Hey everybody. So we got our top action focus today, which I think was pretty well timed. Overall, something that we really need considering all the speculation that was happening, broadly, but certainly on my part. Having a faction focus today, I think, really cleared up a lot of big questions that I had about how the army will function in 9th edition 40K. So overall, I want to know what you guys think. How does today's preview affect our army? What does it mean for army composition? I, of course, have my own thoughts that we will talk about here shortly. But yeah, so I think probably the biggest change, or the biggest thing that we learned, is that For the Greater Good works exactly the same way that it did before. There's no changes, and there are changes, but the changes are really meant to maintain functionality, not lose it. So For the Greater Good still works the same way it did. Units within 6 inches can fire as if they were also being charged, but all units with this special rule can fire Overwatch automatically. They don't have to spend command points to do it, which is remarkable. That's fantastic. That's great. It's certainly good, right? Tau are one army that doesn't have to pay a command point to Overwatch now, for the most part. They say the whole army, but the rules preview that they give makes it pretty clear that's only units that have For the Greater Good. So things that don't have For the Greater Good still have to pay a command point to Overwatch, it seems. But it's crazy about how far off the Overwatch preview was, right? The Overwatch preview actually got edited after it was posted to remove a bit about Tau, where it said that Tau could Overwatch 2 for 1. And so that makes a really good use of a command point. Well, it turns out that that's just totally off. That remark made it seem very much to me like Tau were going to be in the bullseye, in the scope of this nerf, and that it was really meant to affect them more than anybody. But GW has done kind of a 180, or at least the appearance is a 180, where they are not doing that at all. So it's crazy about how misleading that original article was. It's just astounding. Somebody was not talking to somebody else when that was written. Notably, I was also wrong, right? I thought Tau were going to be bearing the brunt of this change as well, and they're not taking that approach. So good. This is good. But as I've said before, if your strategy is to rely on being charged, then something else is probably going wrong. So certainly good, right? I'm not going to complain about having this. That's great. But right, overall, your strategy shouldn't be get charged. So how much this really makes a difference going forward, we'll have to see. I still think there's a lot of, one of the areas where I think this probably makes the most difference is the way that a lot of those more squishy, close combat oriented units were going to be buffed are going to be buffed in 9th edition. Those are the ones that are going to be a little bit more reluctant to charge now. So we have a deterrent against those really glass cannon units, more so than we do the more durable units, which is nice. I think this is a reasonable compromise, considering the emphasis on line of sight blocking terrain and close combat in 9th edition. So it makes sense, right? We talked about how they kind of got to give Tau something to stand out in 9th edition. Otherwise, if they can't see and they can't psychic and they can't punch, all they can do is shoot. Like, having Overwatch at least is something. So that's good. Okay. So that's good. Let me just catch up with the chat here. So the optimists were correct. I'm honestly really surprised. So the other major thing that we learned is not as good of news. And it's frankly probably worse news than the good news is good. And that is that Fly no longer allows you to hop out of combat and fire. presumably it still allows you to hop out of combat, but you cannot fire your weapon after doing so, just like a unit without fly does in 8th. So that's huge, right? Frankly, I would much rather have maintained the functionality of fly and lost Overwatch, because that functionality, I think you actually end up doing more damage when you fall back and shoot than you do in Overwatch anyway. So yeah, I would rather have people hop out of combat and still be able to fire. In particular, I would like crisis suits to be able to do that. I think this is a really significant change for the cost benefit analysis of crisis suits versus riptides. So if we're looking at riptides right now in 9th edition, they're going to be able to fire in close combat. Crisis suits can't fire in close combat, and they can't get out of combat to fire either. So this whole idea that I've been going with of having like highly mobile, short to mid-range armies is still viable, but from a crisis suit perspective, that's a lot of points wrapped up in a unit that could get charged and then not be able to shoot. So having this more aggressive unit of crisis suits out front probably is not as viable of a strategy as, at least in the early turns, or when they have an opportunity to be charged. So if you're dealing in a scenario where you've largely cleared the field, then perhaps this is not the same. But going forward, the crisis suits, I think, are a little bit more vulnerable here because of this. So there's probably even more of a role for screens now. And Brian Pullen says this in the preview too. And Brian Pullen obviously knows what he's talking about. But he says, look at Kroot as being your screens. Yesterday we talked about Kroot as being advantageous for outflanking and for grabbing objectives, that sort of thing. In this preview, he talks about drones filling a little bit more of that role, and I'll mention that in a moment. But Kroot as being more of a screen, and yeah, it will really depend on points, right? If they're cheap, they could work well just because of the size of their unit. They can sit out in front and screen and physically block advances and charges, which it makes sense. But it really will require that points drop. The math will have to be there for that to really be effective, because if we're making the comparison between Kroot as a screen and Fire Warriors as a screen, as the points are now, Fire Warriors are still the better bang for your buck given their durability and everything like that. So that we really have to look at the points here, and this is hopefully part of kind of stretching out that lower end of the point spectrum. Hopefully gives a little bit more granularity here to the point that Kroot are appropriately costed. But there's also kind of this thing where in these previews they kind of prop up some units that it kind of seems like there's the honest opinions in these faction focus articles, and then there's the opinions that are kind of there because people want them to be there. Games Workshop wants them to be there. So picking out certain units, saying like, oh, well, this would be a great thing here. Maybe that's true in like a casual or narrative environment, but not necessarily in a competitive environment. So it's hard to tell which units those are right now. But just keep in mind that, I keep thinking about the Blood Angels preview from a few years ago that talked about X, Y, and Z units being so amazing, and then they weren't. Yeah. So yeah, Brian Pullen's the Tabletop Titans guy. Right. So yeah, I mean, if we're able to have screens, like, let's say Kroot, or drones or Fire Warriors, and they're appropriately costed, this actually could work out pretty well, given the idea of charging units needing to make all of their targets. So if you have your Kroot out in front, and then a few inches behind them you have your crisis suit unit, then they would have to have to charge both the recruit and the crisis suit unit. Or if you have, this is kind of something else I've been thinking about, is a hazard suit that has, -2 inch to charge range. Have a hazard suit out in front with a bunch of drones. They multi-charge into that suit. They're at a deficit, or a grav inhibitor drone would do a similar thing. Any of those things would help make those screens even more effective. And so maybe you're going to see a little bit more of a mosaic screen that incorporating those range mitigation rules alongside physical barriers like Crude. Yeah, so Crisis Bodyguards as vets for okayish melee units. That's perhaps this is where having the investment in bodyguards, not that it was a bad option currently, but it seems like it's actually going to pay more dividends in 9th. So maybe opting for that bodyguard veteran squad instead of just a standard veteran squad is going to be a better choice than in 9th. Yeah, that's a great point. It's a wonderful point. Okay, so a couple other things that they clarified. They said modifier cap is a net effect, not a gross effect. So if you have -3, it's capped at -1, but it doesn't mean that you have to pick one of those minuses. So stealth suits, ghost keels, stealth drones, or on the positive side, Markerlights, different stratagems, all those things that modify to hit rolls still have a role to play, and that role is redundancy. They ensure that you negate other people's abilities, which is not as useful, but still useful. So that's good. Bodyguards do cost more. And there was really an emphasis on Tau being a mobile army, and this has been my perspective on it as well. Going through these previews is that we have to be a more mobile army. Looking at drones, small units of drones, as being really good at grabbing secondaries. It was something that Brian Pullen mentioned, and that makes sense. That's cool. I think this is probably more of a role than for things like gun drones. So instead of using your fire warrior squads or whatever, your characters, instead of using them to pump in more shield drones, maybe you pump in some gun drones, and those gun drones are able to go off and do several things at once. They can grab objectives, as mentioned in the faction focus. They can deny outflank, and they can screen charges, and do all three of those things at once. And that seems like a really economical choice, especially if the points stay where they are. And so we were talking about how 2-man drone units might not be as useful in 9th edition because they're no longer able to screen for characters. Well, here's something. All three of these things are things that 2-man drone units are actually going to be very good at. So yes, assuming that the mission type is favorable, right? So Vior Law will be much more viable with new mobility. I think I've always liked Vior Law as a sept. It's one of my favorite septs to play because of that mobility. I think Farsight Enclaves are still going to be a really strong choice, especially because with obscuring terrain, when you have something come in, it's potentially going to be much closer to you. So and of course the smaller board size helps that too. But having smaller board size, having that obscuring terrain means that that when you fire, the chances are you're going to be closer than in 8th edition. Yeah, Rancid 2 commanders. Yeah, so they also clarified that the commander rule is still around. You're still limited to 1 commander per detachment, which was a subtle drop in the preview, but yes, there is a 1 commander per detachment rule maintained in 9th edition that is not going away with the day 1 FAQ. Tau will still only be able to fit 1 commander in each detachment, which for most armies means 1 commander unless you pay command points to bring multiple detachments. And And so for that reason, that still, leans heavily into Farsight enclaves. Commanders were one of the units that they highlighted as a key unit. They did commanders and fireblades and Stormsurges, and I thought it was a little weird that the whole article was talking about how Tau have to be so mobile, and then they're like, oh yeah, but then the Stormsurge can just sit in one place and not move, which, yeah, I think there is a lot of cool things happening for Stormsurges in this rule set, but I don't know if they're going to be the unit that you take. We'll kind of have to see how it all actually plays out, of course. So a gun line, it's great having a gun line that could potentially be so powerful, but no one wants to play against that. Yep. Yeah, I mean, you got to think about it's a social contract, right? You got to communicate with your opponent. If you are just trying to have a fun game, you should bring a list that's fun. If you're trying to win a GT, you should bring a list that's going to win a GT. Yeah. So general question on Sakia. You guys always tell me how to say it, and I never remember. So it's one per unit. So it's not like you're not going to get 35 out of 36 hits from a Fireblade. Yeah, right. So yeah, you can take Shaosen in a Farsight detachment now because she's a generalist character now. Yep. Is the commander limit? So the commander limit is the same. It still applies to Farsight and Shadowsun. They still count as commanders. But Farsight Enclaves allows you to take 2 per detachment. So Farsight Enclaves, your battalion detachment that you take to begin with, is going to have 2 commanders in it as opposed to just 1, which is a good thing. Yeah. Yes, the Stormsurge is a vehicle, so we'll just keep blasting 24/7. That'd be true if it was a monster too. But yeah, the Stormsurge is going to be able to, the Stormsurge will sit and anchor and just be able to pew 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 all day long. Even if it's charged, it can pew pew pew. And if it has its anchors down, it gets a +1, which will compensate for the -1 to hit for firing weapons in close combat for a vehicle. So you're actually hitting on your normal ballistic skill, and that's nice. That's good. And so I think Stormsurges do have something to do there. I just wonder. There's 2 things that make me a little nervous. Well, 3 things. One, they're not moving, so they're not able to capture objectives. Of course, you have other units to do that. That's fine. Another is that it depends on line of sight. So if there is a lot of obscuring terrain, you're not going to be able to use a lot. They're really dependent on having that clear firing lane. And with the smaller board and the way that terrain works, I think that's going to be harder to do in 9th edition. Then finally, it depends on how it depends on what we have for blast weapons on the Stormsurge. If those are all blast weapons, that's going to be, you're not going to be able to fire them in close combat for one thing, but it does make them more punchy against hordes of opponents that are coming at you. So, yeah, my guess is that a lot of the Tau big weaponry that has multiple modes of fire will have one mode of fire that's blast and one that is not. So if anchors are down, does that mean that Markerlights are worthless for them, or will they be reworking our Markerlights? My guess is that I feel like there's going to be a rework of the Markerlights when the Codex comes out, not before. But are Markerlights useless if they already have a +1 to hit from having anchors? No, because there are other things that could give it a -1. And so +1, -1 gives you a net 0. So then you pull in your Markerlight hit and then you have a +1 again. So there's still a role, and that role is redundancy. So are Stormsurges a gunline or mobile type unit? They are a gunline unit. They're not going to, they ain't going nowhere. What do I think is going to happen to the Ghost Kill? Well, so my assumption is always that GW will make the smallest changes possible to specific rules like those in a codex in this situation. So I was surprised about the change for the greater good. I would also be surprised though if they did something about ghost kills. I think having the -1, well, I guess the -2, I think is just going to be viewed as a way to maintain that -1 even when there are other modifiers in play. I don't think that they're going to change it on day one to totally give it some new ability. That'd be nice. I mean, you could, maybe maybe they would say, that the count is being like in heavy cover or something. I don't know. Like you could see something like that as being a rules change for ghost kills, but I don't know. I give it a 65% chance that they don't do anything on it. So they didn't remove fly from Crisis, but I mean, they removed 8th edition fly from Crisis, and that is that, in 8th edition, Crisis suits anything with fly could fall back and shoot. And in 9th edition, fly doesn't do that. Fly presumably allows you to fall back, ignore intervening miles in terrain, but it does not allow you to shoot after falling back. And so, yeah. So we've lost fly in the 8th edition sense. Yep. Right. So yeah, I'm, like I said, I would rather have kept fly and lost Overwatch. So for like I saw, Mini Wargaming posted a picture of the preview, and presumably it was Dave, and he always said that he was really really frustrated about this how Tower keeping Overwatch, and it's like, well, yeah, I think that's kind of a win. Really, if I'm a charging unit, yeah, you can fire Overwatch, but it's still just Overwatch. It's not like I can hop out of combat and shoot you in the face again. So, yeah, right. Like that's the biggest thing for playing against like Blood Angels, for example. Again, yeah, you can get in there. They'll charge you, and whatever happens in combat happens in combat. But then you hop out and can use whatever's left. And that's, I think, a more valuable thing than firing Overwatch. Yeah, I think if they were to give us jump shoot jump back, it's very, very unlikely that would happen. But if they were, it would just be as a errata for the jetpack keyword. Yeah, hopefully jetpack will do something. That was that was the hope since keywords were introduced, right? They showed up in this book right here. Lovely Index Xenos 2 had the keyword jetpack introduced. Everybody's like, what does jetpack do? Does nothing. Codex comes along. Everybody's like, oh, well, the Codex will solve that. The Codex will give us something for jetpack. It did not. Greater Good came out. Everybody said, oh, well, that will give us something for jetpack. It kind of did, right? It gave us some stratagems that trigger off the jetpack keyword, but not the ones you wanted. So, Pulse carbine. Yeah, I've been thinking about pulse carbines too. I think that there is a much larger role for carbines in ninth than eighth. I'm excited to, well, not really, because I have very few carbines actually modeled, but um, carbines seem like they might actually be a pretty good bet, especially if you take the custom step tenet that extends their range. So, and with a counter fire blade, that could be an effective choice. But yes, I am leaning towards breachers more than strike teams. Yeah, so Missile Pod Crisis versus Cyclic Ion Blaster Crisis, the way that it's worked out, well, so one thing, because we lost fly, because we can't fall back and shoot, I don't want to confuse people more than I already have. Because we can't fall back and shoot with crisis suits now, we can kind of think about crisis suits as being much more similar to broadsides than they were previously, right? Broadsides had a few things limiting their mobility. The lack of the fly keyword was one of them, and crisis suits, although they can ignore models and terrain now, can't fall back and shoot. And so the comparison between them is much more apples to apples. If the points stay roughly comparable between the two, broadsides are going to be the better choice for missile pods. So I think if you're going to be looking at bringing missile pods, broadsides are going to be the way to go. Although I do see the temptation because of the way that screening is going to work and charging and fly are now working, having crisis suits hang back more. I think that might not be as optimal of a choice as just going with broadsides at that point. So if you're going to bring crisis suits, my guess is that's still going to be better to bring. Actually, it's probably going to be good to bring cyclic ion blasters and then their old comrade, the airburst fragmentation projector. I'm really excited to see what the rules are on this. Hopefully it has blast, and hopefully it maintains a lot of the functionality it has now, because I think it will do very well. So having 2 cyclics and an AFP seems like the way I want to go right now. Any news on what they're doing with Forge World models? Not exactly. We know that the rules are being addressed by the core team, no longer as a separate entity, and so that's about all we know. So that's good because they should be addressed in a timely manner, but we don't know exactly what form that will take. Okay. Yeah, so I'm kind of thinking more about a list. Again, I still think piranhas are good. I'm looking more at Kroot as being a larger part of my army now, given today's preview compared to yesterday. Even yesterday, I said maybe 1 unit. Maybe we're looking at 2 or 3 units now, as well as our units of breachers. Yeah. So the Arvarna, I'm excited about. I want to see what the Arvarna looks like. Of course, I'm assuming it's going to have blast, and if it has blast, that's good. It's also bad because can't fire those in close combat. So. Do I think Tau will get some new melee? No, I think that they're going to have Kroot. They'll have Kroot, and I think the big changes you'll see are maybe you'll get a new crew unit. Maybe they'll bring in something that kind of like Narlock Riders would be cool. But I don't think that we'll see like a close combat suit or anything like that. Although people have desperately wanted one, I don't think we'll get one. And if we do get one, I don't think it will be what you want. I think it will be kind of like it'll be a token, really. Yep. So if you're doing veteran, if you're doing the veteran cadre, yeah, I mean, you can at that that improves their ballistic skill. It's not really a modifier. So as far as I remember, so correct me if I'm wrong on that. All right, did I lose you guys? Are you still here? Okay. Yep, you're still here. Great. My computer just went like totally black for a second, and it was alarming. Okay. Okay. Let's do this for like 2 more minutes, and then we're gonna head out. Yep. Yes. +1 to ballistic skill is different than +1 to hit, or improving the ballistic skill by 1 is different. Yes, a video on ranking tile units. At this point, it seems pretty. If I were to make a video on ranking tile units, it seems pretty short-lived. I will probably do that once we have the new codex out. I will try to do that. I am going to do a video here talking about the units that I think are going to do best in 9th edition, whether that's a live stream like this or a edited, prepared video. I'm not sure. Let me know what you guys want in the comments here or in the chat. If you want it to be a less rambly video, if I have any of those, let me know. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I still think enclaves are be the way to go. I still think there's a role for crisis suits. It's just a lot more nebulous now than it was when they had fly, when they had the ability to jump out of combat and shoot. Thoughts about marker? What do you want to know, John? What do you want to know about Markerlights? I'm generally pro Markerlight. So Remora, I wish Remoras had the same war gear that they did in 7th, before the index, because I think then I would definitely take them. Right now, I'm hoping that the points are correct, that they're viable in 9th. But I'm still looking. I was thinking originally like a Tiger Shark and then like 4 or 6 Remoras would be really cool. It would look cool at least. Now I'm thinking maybe a Tiger Shark and a Sun Shark bomber, but I know that I'm questioning whether or not having the Tiger Shark is going to be economic or not, because it's a flyer. Like it's going to do what flyers do. It's not going to grab objectives, and it seems like there's going to be a lot of a big trade-off there. It seems like there's going to be a big opportunity cost if it can't cap objectives. What would make recruits more usable? I have an entire video ranting about that. So I would encourage you to check that out. And it's an edited video, so it's much easier to navigate. We do need better flashlights. Crews do need a new model. They do need a new model. Yeah. So I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you guys so much for joining me and talking with me. Your comments here are awesome, and I appreciate the back and forth. So don't be afraid to keep the conversation going. If you're watching this later on, throw stuff down in the comments. We will talk about it there. All right. As always, thanks for joining me, and happy wargaming.